Makes you wonder, will this be our final video and look at this place? Possibly. With my recent video release of the former Angela Park that was very well received, I figured why not come back to the place I filmed my very first abandoned defunct park known as Rocky Glen Park. But recently, some changes have been taking place that could potentially change this location forever. What we're going to do today is my friend Andy and I are going to not only share some of the recent news that was announced, but also give you what could potentially be one final look at this place here in 2025. To find out what's going on and to potentially see this place for one final time, all you need to do is come along with us. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to come back to this park, not only because there's been some recent news announced, but because this place I called home when I was a young child. I've done numerous videos here. I actually have an entire Rocky Glen playlist. And thanks to Andy, who is the administrator of the Rocky Glen Memories Facebook group, I have learned so much about this place I never even knew. Not only about events that took place, rides that used to be here, and the operational status of the park being divided between two different owners. It was really fascinating to learn it, and I'm glad I was able to document it over time. But like I said, this may be our final look, but what we're going to be showing you today are some new things that Andy did learn throughout his research period from our last video. Some location of things and maybe some new identity of what things used to be. So throughout the video, there will be some photos and some new information shared that probably wasn't seen or talked about in the previous videos.
So one of the things that I did discover, again, Rocky Glen's history is always fluid and it's always changing. We always discover new things. And one of the things that I found from an old 1920s photo is that this wooden platform that's here, which some people have thought was a part of the Laurel Line or something like that, it actually wasn't. It was an observation deck that I believe the Philadelphia Toboggan Company actually put in so that they could see the tracks underneath the tunnel of the Mountain Dips coaster, which started at the top of this area up here and actually went down into the valley in front of the dam. Now that coaster was there from 1920 to 1939, but this observation deck had never been removed and always stayed here. So I do have a picture that I'll give to Jason to show everybody, and he'll be able to zoom in and look at the actual deck. But I believe that that's what it was for, because there's steps that go down to it, and it's not very big, as you can see, but I do believe that that is where they would look under the tunnel to see the Laurel Line and also use it to look down into the valley to make sure that there was no issues with the coaster and observe it if they needed.
Out to our left over here is the dam and lake area. Directly across, we're just observing some of the old and new, as Andy calls it, where there's some older, more primitive stonework, which met up with the newer, more modern cinder block walls. And these are more or less just retention walls. You can also see remnants of something coming out this way as well. But they're still existing in modern day here in 2025, clearly visible, holding it pretty well. But again, won't be forever, so just give you some looks at it while we can. Looking out to the rear portion of the lake, this is a view we haven't seen in quite a while. Ever since they did drain the lake, I believe this is probably the highest the water's ever been. Typically, you're able to get all the way out there and almost walk across with just a little trickle of water, kind of connecting a pipe area that's submerged underwater now. And water is up, not to full capacity, but much higher than it's ever been. Right here, we're looking at which would have been the high dive area. Normally that's dry and exposed, and there's a diving board down there, and they would have had a tall platform for the high dive act, which is a nice deep hole right here. And right in front of us is a little sandy patch. This was my swimming hole with my family. We'd come down here before this was all growing in. Obviously water would be right up to the edge here, but we'd be able to put our stuff on the concrete. I did some snorkeling here of the underwater dock area. And those of you who haven't seen, I actually snorkeled a good portion of this lake all along the edge, through the channel over there, over to the spillway. So, and anything I am mentioning today will be featured in the Rocky Glen playlist, featured down below in the description. But Andy's gonna talk about something, because where we're standing, well, it wasn't always land. What can you tell us?
Yeah, well, back in the day, in the early parts of the park, the water line actually went all the way up to the edge of what was basically a way for the people to watch a water show that was actually on a boat. So the different levels that existed up on the hill, which if you remember in the 80s, that's where the Red Barn Theater was, and most of the concerts before the dance hall was built. The water line used to go all the way up to that wall when it was built. So obviously there was dirt underneath it, but all of this area here was built up in the 50s. And then all that area, which is over by the Swiss Cottage, you can see the remains of the cottage, just the corner, those corner stones there. The water used to go right up to the Swiss Cottage. I don't know, I'm not an engineer. I don't know that this ground here is actually stable enough to handle having multiple houses, if that's what it comes to. I certainly wouldn't buy a house that was close to the water. I'm too afraid it would settle. Even looking at the ground here, we see that it's uneven in a lot of spots here. That looks like it's settled over the years. That's just me. Obviously, I wouldn't buy a house that's actually in the water, the former water line here. Because if you're willing to buy one of those, I have a bridge for sale in Brooklyn for you. So we're standing on what was originally known as the Aquarium. It was built in 1949, and it was going to be Ben Sterling's dance hall to combat the Nowlin and Jennings side, who had their own dance hall, because at that time they were at war with each other, and they needed to have their own stuff to not rely on the other. So this is actually a man-made concrete pad that, of course, was filled with water at one time, but now used as a dance hall, later a penny arcade, and it was the site of most of the major acts of the 1980s, including Bon Jovi, Meatloaf, and dozens upon dozens of others that came to the lake. And some of them still remember that they were near the body of water playing in their bands in the 80s. So this section here is a man-made thing. Also, in this little area here, this is one of the places they kept the riverboat for storage during the off seasons or at night, and so it wasn't out exposed to the elements. And of course, you can see the beach is not what it used to be because the water's so low.
We're now standing at the base of the hill. Lake is straight through there, and I came over here to show you one of my favorite areas of the entire park, the location of the famous stone couches. Now, as Andy was talking about earlier, this was another viewing area, seating area for watching the lake, watching the performances, whether it be the high dive act, water skiing, or just kind of taking a break to take in the scenery. But these are relatively original to the park when it did open up, and they've been surviving quite well, complete with the armrests and everything. A little bit of nature's carpet growing on them. But we've got two right here, and then further over there are some single chairs, almost like sofa chairs, and a love seat. So always fascinated me to see these, and it's kind of like ancient, so to speak, with how old they are, and to know that they're still here to this day, and eventually they're going to be gone. It's kind of sad to think about, but right now someone is utilizing this area for their own personal, whether it be party spot, camping spot. So at least it's kind of getting some use. It's relatively cleaned up for the most part. But just wanted to give you another look at these in case this may be the final chance we get to see them.
Well, this is the hill. Anybody who's gone to Rocky Glen as a kid loved going down the hill to the lake, but never liked walking back up it. This hill was also used for the duck, which was an amphibious machine that was put in the 40s. They would actually get people down at the bottom. That's how they would get on the ride. They would ride up the hill, turn around, and then shoot themselves straight down the hill and right into the water. It was a great idea. Unfortunately, after time, somebody got hit, they sued, and it wasn't long after that, the mighty duck was all gone. So this area, we don't really talk about that much in the early part of the 20th century, but along this area was a very grand and their very first dance hall. And we'll give some pictures to show that of what it was. It was only here till about 1909, I believe, and then it burned down in a fire. It was Rocky Glen's first fire, I believe. It was a grand dance hall, looked over the Laurel line. You could see everything over the lake and the dam and the outlet. It was a very picturesque scene. Later on, the first ever mouse-type coaster was here at Rocky Glen. That was called the Jazz Railway. Now, the Jazz Railway was actually in the same exact spot, and it was an amazing machine, but it was only here for a short time. I believe it was removed because too many people were getting hurt. But the actual first predecessor of a mouse-type coaster was right here in Moosic, Pennsylvania at Rocky Glen Park.
We are now standing in a section of the park that we haven't seen too many times on the tours, or even me personally walking through the park. But now that winter is still kind of lingering here with the foliage, we now have a great view of things, and Andy wanted to share just a couple things about this area, what used to exist.
Sure, so in the 80s and early 70s, this was more of the kids' rides area. The Sea Dragon is just down a little bit from where we are, but a lot of the kids' rides, the helicopter rides, their little rocket rides were in this area. Those of you in the 50s and 60s may remember the Love in the Dark, and that was located in this area as well. Where exactly it is, I'm not 100%, but it is in this area only by a few steps. You know, earlier than that, there was a shooting gallery. Just above up here, the entrance to the Mountain Dips coaster when it was there from 1920 to 1939. And then after that, they put in what was called the Rocket Ride. Now, the Rocket was the earliest version of a type of bay and curve. Those of you who are Knoebel connoisseurs will know that name. It just went around in a circle and was very fast. But for the late 40s or But for the early 40s, that was the type of ride that they loved to see. Kids today want something much bigger and bigger coasters and all that stuff. But for the early 1940s, the Rocket Ride was a really fast circular ride, and it was popular, but it was junk, as Ben Sterling called it, and it didn't last very long in the park.
And you mentioned too about something that used to exist, like a wishing well?
I believe that half circle there is actually the remnants of the wishing well. I'm not 100%, but if I was a betting man, I believe that's what it was. And basically it was a way for people to throw coins in, just like they do at the mall. They have the fountains, and you throw a quarter in to make a wish. It's just a little extra money on the side that they're looking for, just like a penny arcade would. So we're standing in what was in the 80s known as the Golden Nugget Casino. It was an arcade. But interestingly enough, back in the beginnings of the park, this circular structure was actually the first carousel house of Rocky Glen. When the carousel was removed around 1913, in 1919 when they started bringing stuff back, this actually became a Dodgems, one of the first Dodgems that were out there, maybe the only one I've ever heard of that was actually in a circle, as opposed to the ovals that we're familiar with, or rectangles where there's a centerpiece that you had to drive around. It was literally like a demolition derby. One giant circle, and they all just hit each other. Now eventually they removed it, and this became the dance hall after the Laureline station had some issues, and then they flipped back and forth between the arcade being here and then the Laureline. But there was always talk about Frank Sinatra playing at Rocky Glen. This is where he played. This was the dance hall at that time frame. So we would be sitting in the rectangular structure, and he'd be up on the stage over that way, and everybody would be dancing along to a then very young Frank Sinatra. This fire hydrant is actually very important in Rocky Glen's history because it actually pinpoints where the southeast corner of the Crystal Dance Pavilion was. So at this point right here, I can tell this was where the pavilion was, and just off here to the left was where the Tokyo Canal was, which was a water ride. And then also off to the left of that was where the Pippin Coaster was, where its entrance was. So this old fire hydrant is actually the key to figuring out exactly where things were back in the 1920s, all over 100 years ago.
And one of the main reasons Andy and myself decided to come here to make this video is because, as I mentioned, there was some news that was shared about this park possibly changing forever. And that news was back in late 2024
Sure.
that this was put on the market for sale. He's going to share some of the finer details about it. But with that being said, this is not the first time that it's been talked about this park being sold or this property, because offers have been made in the past. Obviously, that never came to fruition. But right now, with it actively being on the market, that means that the future is bleak for it remaining a reclaimed land space. And I'm going to share, after he shares the details, what my best hopes would be for this property, but he's probably going to tell you what is most likely going to happen here. So what can you tell us?
Well, I mean, obviously we all know that it's been offered for, I believe, 14 million. I mean, personally, I think that's a little too high for undeveloped land. There's no sewer lines. There's really no water lines here anymore. A lot of work has to be done. Certainly somebody with money is gonna, you know, they'll expend the money. Are we gonna see a park? Not likely. Is it impossible though? No, nothing's impossible, but likely we won't see any kind of park. If anything, it would be a state park that we'd be able to walk around, which would be a nice thing to be able to walk around, see where the rides were, do tours like we used to do in the past. But we just don't know. That's the real reality of what's going on. Now we know that the dam is going to be remediated. They said they're going to build it, which is going to be something new. So the 1902 dam will be removed in some fashion, and they will build a new dam that will probably get the water level back up to where it used to be and be a more safer for the next 100+ years for it being here. Certainly, housing is a discussion that's been going on. I'm not 100% sure that that's going to be worth it here. That's up to somebody with money to decide. Likely commercial is a possibility as well. I'm not sure that a commercial property would want the lake per se. Certainly I have heard rumors in the past that Bass Pro was looking to build here and use the lake as a fishing part of their thing, which a lot of them do not have as far as I'm aware.
Even for equipment demonstrations as well?
Right, certainly it would be beneficial if it was a public walking area. That's pure speculation though, we don't know about that. I know that there were offers in the past. A gentleman who will remain unnamed told me he offered the owners 1.5 million. He was flat out turned down, which again, if they're looking for 14 million, I can understand why.
Do you know roughly how many acres are here?
About 212 total. Rocky Glen, actually, the park itself, for all the fun stuff, wasn't even like half of the actual acreage in here. A lot of the owners in the 1980s had some very big visions of putting cabins along the lake for overnighting, kind of like what Knoebels does, but it would be near the lake, and you know, they had some really great plans. It's a shame that the owners of the land and Marvin Roth, who was the owner of the park itself, couldn't get to an agreement to sell it. So Roth closed the park, and the owners essentially died without selling it. The lawyers of the owners now own it, and again, it's been vacant since 1987 with no development. So to me, it's like, hey, listen, they're going to develop Rocky Glen. I'll believe it when I see it. Because we've heard it for 30 some years now that it's going to be developed.
That's the thing. If someone actually does purchase the property, it still could sit like this for another decade.
Right, because maybe they thought they had the capital to build, and now the building market crashes or something like that. It may always be this way. We don't know.
And as I was hinting to, is my best hope for this place is what Andy mentioned, is that this would be a public park. There's still remnants. For example, we're standing right here on the course of the antique cars. You can still see where it snakes its way through the woods here. Some sections of rail. We've seen ride foundations and pads, stuff like that. To be able to come here though, publicly, legally, and have placards showing you what used to exist, maybe little pavilions, have the lake open to fishing, maybe even swimming again, that would be best case scenario. But we all know that money talks and the rest walks. So there's been rumors about lakefront properties. There's been rumors about commercial warehouses. It's truly up in the air. And for them to get that asking price, we agree it's going to be kind of far-fetched for them to get that price. It's probably going to be sitting on that for a lengthy amount of time, or someone's going to come in at an offer that's going to be kind of right in the middle, and they're going to just accept it just to get rid of it. But with that being said, I just am truly fortunate though to be not only been able to come to this park as a youngster. My memories are rather vague. I still have some strong ones. My older siblings worked here, but I also remember, watching the fireworks down by the lake. Basically what I'm leading to is, thanks to Andy and his group, the Rocky Glen Memories page, is that I have learned so much beyond belief that I haven't even the slightest inkling that things used to exist here. As he talked about the water being closer to the seating area, about the artists that used to perform here, and even some of the rides that were kind of innovative back in the time, debuted at this park. So if you guys ever want to go down a rabbit hole, you could do two things. You could either go to my Rocky Glen playlist, watch all my previous videos back from probably close to 10 years ago, where I was even shy to be on camera, to snorkeling the lake and then doing multiple group tours with Andy and others who are fond of the park. Also, his page will be linked down below as well. How many members do you have currently?
We just passed 24,000, which is amazing for a park that's been gone for 38 some years, that there's still that much interest. But the story of Rocky Glen is just amazing, from the legends of bodies being buried to snakes in the caterpillar. And, you know, we've walked around all day and we didn't see one today, and there's nobody in the park except us.
And the group, though, is full of fantastic people. A lot of former employees or ancestors that used to work here. And on top of that, Andy has been releasing some never before seen footage that he was able to get from an out-of-state sale, and he's actually in the process of having it digitalized, and he's going to be uploading it on the page, correct? Shortly, yes. Yeah, so if you want to see some of that stuff, definitely check out the link down below. We're going to continue on, see if there's anything else here worth sharing that we haven't talked about or showed before. But otherwise, that's our thoughts on the recent news and what could potentially be our final video here at Rocky Glen.
Okay, so the Rocky Glen Dam was built in 1902 to obviously capture Stafford Meadow Brook and the other end of the water coming in, because that's normally what you do when you build a dam, is you try to get two water sources into one spot. The dam itself was deemed deficient in 1978. That was during the ghost town days, and unfortunately, even since that time, there was no remediation really done. Since then, a couple years ago, DEP came by and they said to the owner of the land that they have to lower the water for safety reasons. That's why the water was removed. So the water was lowered through the old chutes that are over here. Let's walk over here. So the release of the water uniquely is under the dam as opposed to over the dam. The reason why it was built that way is for ice skating. It was very big in the early 20th century. So to get the ice to solidify better, you had to lower the water so that the warmer water wouldn't melt the ice. So lowering the water would keep the ice sturdy so that people could actually go ice skating. That's why the dam was built this way. It was for recreational purposes. Unfortunately, over the years, it needs to be redone. It's the only other, I spoke with DEP, who's the head of the dam services, just out of curiosity, asking them about the dam, and they said it's very similar to the Huntsville Reservoir, which is near the Dallas area in Lehman. The reservoirs are similar, but this doesn't have a real spillway. It just has a waterfall essentially in the middle. The Huntsville Reservoir actually has a hole in the middle where they can let water out or pump water over the dam, and this does not have it. So with the new dam that they're going to build apparently for here, they'll probably get the water back up to its normal level, and they'll incorporate some sort of spillway to this for any kind of overflow. As far as I've been able to see, the dam has never been overtopped in its history, which does confuse me that the middle where the water lets out, it wasn't enough to hold it back for over 100 years. But they're the experts, I am not. So I believe what they say, that they're going to rebuild the dam probably in a totally different look, but it'll sustain the water to its normal levels that used to be back in the day. And what the future holds for that, that's anybody's guess at this point. But it does appear that they want to have at least the lake back in some form.
We're now down here standing in the lower lot of Rocky Glen. This was more or less like an overflow lot, and more recently has been used for overflow parking for the concerts up at the amphitheater of Montage Mountain. Today, it's more or less just a dirt road coming through here, high grasses. Nature has been reclaiming it, but when they do use it for parking, they do come through here with a crew to kind of cut the grass down, put some parking lines, and just to make it usable space for the bigger events. I also want to mention too that for a period of time after Rocky Glen closed, you were still able to ride some of the rides that used to exist here at another nearby park, none other than Knoebels Park. They had both the antique cars and the bumper boats, which used to operate in the lake. Knoebels did purchase them, and although the antique cars are still there, the ones that came from here are no longer in operation. We believe the one that is static display to take your photo in is one of the last remaining ones that came from Rocky Glen. And of course, we know the bumper boats were removed to put in the Impulse roller coaster back in 2015. Now, aside from just being a parking lot, this was a little bit more populated back in the day, so to speak, with some traffic coming through here. And Andy talked about it in previous videos, but just to kind of bring you up to speed as to where we are and where we are in relation to things, what used to come through here.
Right. For the most part, even into the 20s and 30s, it was a parking lot. This was Ben Sterling's parking lot, where the Nowlan and Jennings had the upper parking lot, or the normal one that everybody remembers from the 80s. So this is where all of his patrons parked, and then they walked over the Laurel Line Bridge to get to the park. The Laurel Line actually went a lot closer to where these trees were along there, and that's where the station was down a little bit. But once the Laurel Line was gone, it became a maintenance location. They had maintenance sheds down here for rides in the winter, and it wasn't used much. But then towards the 80s, it became an overflow parking lot, like you said, even for the park. And then later on, okay, once the park closed, they still used it for parking. So parking was its main focus down here. It was never any rides down here other than the mountain dips that was essentially where those trees were. There were really no rides down here. This is probably the most stable land there is in the park to build houses or anything. So if you see anything, it's probably going to be in this lower lot that you'll see some sort of housing development.
And the question we asked at the beginning of the video is, this possibly going to be our last video, last look at Rocky Glen? We don't know the true answer to that. I think possibly, if a buyer does come forth and do something with it. If anything does happen though, say the remediation work on the dam, or if someone does come in here and keeps it open to the public, obviously we will be back in the future to give you some more updates as to what's taking place. But if worst case scenario, we can't come back, his Facebook group and my playlist has this park covered pretty much from head to toe, from open to close. And what were the dates, just briefly to share, of when this park operated?
Well, the park itself, as Rocky Glen with rides, became around late 1903 with ice skating. That's when it first became a destination. I know that there was talk about 1886, but actually they put a patent on the land in 1886, but there was nothing here. When you think about, there's no Laurel Line, there's no roads, nobody has cars. Who's going to drive from Scranton, Wilkes-Barre to come to the middle of the woods and have a picnic? It's just not, it doesn't make any sense. When the dam was built in 1902, 1903 is when they had ice skating. That was the first time this became a destination for people to come and have fun. It's sort of the legend of Rocky Glen is not wrong. It is 1886. That's the story. But the reality was, it wasn't until 1903, in the late years, in the winter, where they had ice skating, that people started coming here as a destination park. Rides came in 1904, the year after.
And obviously throughout it changed hands. Ghost Town Glen was here for a while.
Ghost Town came in 1971 when Ben Sterling finally got to a point that he couldn't continue. Unfortunately, his sons had passed away. There was nobody to pass there was no family to pass it to take over. The grandkids were too young to take over a park. So he opted to sell it, hoping that the corporate money of National Recreation Service, which was the parent of Ghost Town and the Glen, would keep it going when he's long gone. But as we know, unfortunately, that didn't turn out. And
when it closed in '87, it's '87, correct?
Yeah.
Was there intention to open next year?
There was never a final day, and I think that's why Rocky Glen endures to a lot of people like myself who are essentially the children of the Glen. We never saw the end of Rocky Glen because we never were told, hey, this is the last day, come and enjoy your last day. It closed for the year, and I think Gordon from Sesame Street was the last act here, and then next year they noticed that they didn't apply for their license, and it was just like that.
And then there was a public auction. They sold off the rides and everything.
August 26th of '88, I believe, is the correct date. They sold off the things, and that was the day the Glen died. Because there just was no coming back from that. The rides were gone. Somebody would have to bring all new rides in to come in. But Marvin Roth had some very big ideas for the park, but he didn't own the land. And if you're not going to build a roller coaster on land you don't own, unless you're going to have a long-term lease. And he only had a 5-year lease, and that 5th year they refused to give him the park according to the lease. So he said, well, then I'm not going to continue. And they said, okay, because the owners owned another park in New Jersey called Bertram Island Park. They did the same thing. They bought the park, ran it, essentially, you know what, we can't run it anymore, wiped out all the rides and built houses. I think that was their plan here. It just didn't come to fruition, whether they ran out of money or whatever. I think it got foiled, but it was probably the dark forces of Rocky Glen stopped them from building houses here. But there are so many legends of Rocky Glen that there could be a horror movie built on all the stories that exist. That, you know, bodies being buried in the laurel line's path, and you know, it's just some of them. There's some half truths to it, but we could literally make a movie about every little one.
And I think the final nail in the coffin was after the park closed, the remaining structures were set arson. They burned down multiple times.
Sure, people would come here, and obviously, you know, anybody who watched Scooby-Doo, or you know, like a Batman, they went to an abandoned amusement park. So it was almost like real life to them from the cartoons. And you know, some people were, you know, trying to stay warm, and they lit fires. And I don't know that every single one of them was, you know, let's destroy the place. I think people were trying to keep warm in colder months, and it just got out of hand. And that happens today. You see abandoned houses all of a sudden catch fire because people are in the house trying to stay warm.
And I even know too that through the, I'd say, 90s up into the early 2000s, this place was almost like a park at that time, because there was dozens, if not hundreds of people that would come here for boating, fishing, camping. I mean, I was one of them as well. And this place was just flock full of people that were just enjoying what was once a park.
Right.
Now just, you know, kind of natural grounds, the lake, hiking the trail, stuff like that.
And it's a shame it could never be that.
Yeah.
You know, a public place where you could come. Certainly even Marvin Roth had the idea of making cabins and making this a campsite for the future of Rocky Glen. And you have to be forward thinking like that to keep your park alive. You know, people will always say, oh, insurance was always that killed Rocky Glen. Well, then how did Knoebels survive? Like, well, Knoebels didn't have millions and billions and millions of dollars. Well, how did they survive? Innovation is what got them. They brought the Phoenix, which was then the rocket from San Antonio. Their attendance tripled in 1983, I think it was, when they built their 84.
85 is when they brought it to Knoebels.
85. So 85.
40-year anniversary this year.
Right. It's amazing to think that it tripled in attendance. And here's the other parks with a 30-year-old roller coaster that people are already bored with, and I'll be one of them. That was my first large coaster, and it's like, okay, what are we going to do next? Can't build a new roller coaster on land you don't own. So Rocky Glen died from lack of innovation. They didn't bring those rides in that would go, wow, let me go do a flying turns. The only one you can find in the world, the Rocket or the Phoenix. You know, the Phoenix was an amazing coaster, but it didn't survive in San Antonio. And Knoebels will have to evolve eventually. They'll have to have another coaster. I mean, they had Impulse. They're probably already thinking about what's going to be our next coaster. Where are we going to put it?
Yeah, it can't stay that way forever.
Right, it's going to get stale. And that doesn't mean that you can't have the old ones to still ride on. Like Kennywood has some very old coasters, over 100 years old. So it certainly doesn't mean you can't have the old stuff. But if you don't bring in something new, you can't just paint the buildings and say it's new this year. It's going to get stale. And Rocky Glen only really had the Sky Ride, the Antique Cars, and the Sea Dragon. Over the last 70s and 80s, that was a new ride that wasn't something you could get at a carnival.
Yeah, a lot of them brought in portable carnival rides.
Right, and the Sea Dragon, you could argue, could be a carnival ride, but you know, a lot of the stuff that the Rocco plane, like all that stuff is just, you can move it. You know, it wasn't a standalone ride that would bring people to come to the park. Innovation is what killed Rocky Glen in the end, because if Knoebels survived the insurance, Rocky Glen could have too.
And as we've learned with my most recent video of Angela Park, there were multiple parks in the area that faced the same fate as Rocky Glen. So there's the ones I know offhand is Rocky Glen, obviously, right here where we are. Angela Park in Drums. There was Sansui in Hanover. There was Hamptons Park at Harvey's Lake. There's also Naog Park. Right, they had a small amusement park.
And there were a lot of smaller ones that existed before the 40s that had roller coasters north of here. I'd have to get the list out, but they had their own large coasters, and they were all destinations. But
that grouping, though, a lot of them closed in the same era.
It seemed right before the war. A lot of them, the Depression, the 30s, they didn't survive, and then the 80s. It seemed like the 80s they couldn't survive.
Yeah.
And you know, luckily we haven't seen any mass closings to, you know, them. But going back to what I said about Rocky Glen being gone, like, we didn't know it was going. And I tell everybody, imagine if Knoebels closed tomorrow. Like, all the kids in our area would be like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean it's gone?
Yeah.
Yep, they sold off, it's going to be houses now. Well, every kid would be like, well, what am I going to do now? You know, now I got to go to Hershey or Dorney, but it doesn't have that feel of the local park that Knoebels does. And thank God Knoebels endured and survived the 80s, but they did it with innovation. And if they didn't innovate, they would have fell the same way.
Well, I mean, honestly, we could stand here all day, keep talking about history of parks, especially Rocky Glen. And I just want to wrap up saying that my best hope, if it does get sold or not, is that it kind of remains just how it is. You know, let nature reclaim it, go back to how it used to be before the park came here, and that if it ever does turn into a public attraction place on any capacity, that's a win for us, I think. If it doesn't, then that's to be, you know, how things roll with business and opportunity for businesses and homes or development, whatever does take place. But only time's going to tell. We can't, you know, predict the future. We can only speculate, and we may be on the right course. We may be far off, but time will tell, like it does with everything else. But I do want to thank Andy for coming out not only today, but multiple times in the past for giving tours to the public, helped me with multiple videos, getting aerial shots, overlays, and even the photos he provided for this video. It's been a tremendous help, so I just want to thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
And knowledge that you have taught me about this place, that realizing how special it truly was to us locals here.
It really was. It's the heart of the valley with a heart. That's what I've always referred to it as. And because we never saw it end, some of us always think it's just off 502. It's still there. I've never heard it close.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Although the signs are still out there, just a shadow of their former self. Right. But we want to thank you for taking the time to watch this. Hopefully you learned a few new things. And if you have any questions, myself and Andy will do our best to answer them for you down in the comment section. And be sure to check out the Rocky Glen Memories page, because 24,000 members and growing. There's a lot of photos, videos, and people there that can teach you a lot more than we can through this video. Take care, everyone. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.